Thank you, Gary. It's a pleasure to be here and to be part of this course, which has been amazing so far. I have one announcement to make before we begin, and that's yesterday I ran into the person who is responsible for the summer internships program in the department in the U.S. Forest Service. And he said there must be Berkeley students who want to be summer interns for the Forest Service in the forests of the United States. Would you tell them that this week they should go online and apply for summer internships? So that's an invitation to you. The U.S. Forest Service is in the Department of Agriculture, not the Department of what is the name of the Department of the Environment, Gary? Of the Interior. The national parks are in the Department of the Interior. The national forests are in the Department of Agriculture because forestry is a kind of farming. After last week's class on no-till farming, the next morning, I think Gary sent it to you, on the science pages of the New York Times, was an article on the movement to spare the plow. And the next day, there arrived in the newspaper the most recent issue of Sierra Magazine called The Food Issue. It's a kicker saying you are what you plant and harvest and cook and share. That just at the moment when this course is going on, national media are beginning to look at the issues that you guys have been thinking about and been introduced to. In this part of the course, as Gary said last week, having talked about why and how the food system is broken, we're in the part of the class where we get to look at what people are doing about it, what can be done about it. And so we had some farmers last week, and we have some farmers for you this week, remarkable and inspiring ones, about whom you've read a little already, but I wanted, by way of background, to remind you about Wendell Berry's remark that the environmental crisis is a crisis of agriculture, and that the agricultural crisis is a crisis of culture. And David and Nikiko's family, Nikiko's grandfather, after the Japanese were interned, great national shame in World War II, David's father, I'm sure he'll tell you this story, came back, needed to start a life, and bought an orchard, bought a farm in 1948. So I thought I would look up what percentage of the American labor force was doing farming in 1948. Here's the story. Starting in 1880, when there were 50 million people in the United States, 23 million of them lived on farms, and 49% of the American labor force was farmers. In 1890, 62 million people in this country, 30 million of them living on farms, 43% of the working people in the country were engaged in farming. 1900, 76 million people, 38% of them engaged in farming. By 1958, when Joe Matsumoto bought this farm, terrific instinct for what way the market was going, 8% of people were still in farming. American culture absolutely turned around. When Nikiko joined her dad in farming with the terrific instinct, there were, which is right now, 1.9% of people in America are engaged in farming. I told Mass this, and he said, right, she almost made it into 1%. It was the wrong 1%, but she almost made it into 1%. So American culture was a farm culture. And over the course of the 20th century, it was transformed. And part of that transformation was not just an economic transformation, but a cultural transformation. Most people lived in farming cultures, which is to say, as Wendell Berry said, they lived in cultures where they knew their own lives and the lives of the generations that were going to come after them depended on how they treated the land. And that model of how to live in relation to the earth was replaced by a corporate model of how to treat natural resources. And it's what has been demonstrated to you over and over again in the last few lectures. That's what's got us in trouble. So it's really interesting and thrilling to introduce David Matsumoto and Nikiko Matsumoto, because when the tide was running against them entirely, they turned back to the possibility of what it would mean to make a culture out of a family farm. And I think that's what they're going to be talking about today. Let me just say a word more. Both David and Nikiko are graduates of this university. David was born in 1954. He got his BA in sociology from great preparation, I'm sure, for peach ranching at Berkeley, and went on to study community development in a graduate course at UC Davis. And he decided when his dad was ill, to come back to the farm and see what he could do with it. And in about 1987, having tried this and watching I don't know how much of this story you can tell, David, so I don't want to tell it for you, but having seen the difficulty, he thought, I give up. And sat down to write a piece called Epitaph for a Peach, Epitaph for a Peach, about giving up on a certain kind of growing of gorgeous fruits because there was simply no market for it and it was too hard. And he published the piece. And lots of people in the very small but growing food community responded and said, don't do it. Don't stop doing this. It matters a lot. And that essay became the beginning of a book called Epitaph for a Peach, which began a literary career for David, who had gone from sociology and community development to actually being a farmer, to being a farmer writer, to write Harvest Sun for Senses in 5 Seasons, Letters to the Valley, Heirlooms, and most recently with Nikiko, The Perfect Peach. So he became a powerful California artist of the Valley. After John Steinbeck's 2 novels about farming and families, Grapes of Wrath and East of Eden, came David to tell another story of the Central Valley and that life there. He became a powerful writer of our place as he was trying to understand how to live in it and transform it with his work. Nikiko got her assiduous preparation to be a peach farmer by studying feminist theory, gender studies, and critical theory at Berkeley. And after she graduated, she made the decision to go home and work with her dad on the family farm, and there either to continue or did you develop there her own practice of performance art and storytelling as part of their way of not only being farmers economically, but working inside farming culture to describe this movement that you're beginning to see emerge to transform a wounded system of feeding ourselves. So they're kind of stunning pair of people with a great story to tell us. Please welcome David Matsumoto and Nikiko.